Hi, I want to welcome everybody here today. This is the March program of the League of Women Voters of Jackson County. And before we begin our program, I want to take this moment to thank Jennifer Robertson of the Carbondale Public Library for her facilitating this program by Zoom. She has made it much easier for all of us to participate, and I want to thank her for that. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jill Adams, who will introduce our speaker.
Hello. Our speaker today is Tharran Hobson, who is the Program Director of the Nature Conservancy Southern Illinois program. This is a position he's held since 2019, but he has worked in conservation for almost 3 decades. He's been with the Nature Conservancy for 23 years, and before that was with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He tells me that most of his work has been in wetland and river work with wetland restoration, and I will turn it over to Tharran. There will be an opportunity for questions, and if you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end of Tharran's talk. Tharran?
All right, thank you. So, Jennifer, do I have to reshare my screen?
Yes, you do. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining on this glorious spring-like day and taking a little bit of time out of your day to listen to our program. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Nature Conservancy, who we are, and then our little corner of the world and what makes it so special, and what the Nature Conservancy is doing with partners to help preserve and protect it. So I hope you'll get a little bit out of this. I'm going to minimize my, okay. All right. Well, first of all, the Nature Conservancy is a nonprofit conservation organization. We're the largest not-for-profit conservation organization in the world. We have about 1 million members worldwide. We have programs in all 50 states and 79 countries internationally. Since our founding in 1951, we're credited with helping to preserve or protect over 119 million acres. So I am going to talk a little bit about what makes our area so special. So I don't know if a lot of people are aware, but there are 4 distinct physiographic regions that kind of converge here in Southern Illinois. It's unique in that there are only 3 other places in the United States where 4 or more physiographic regions or divisions, if you will, kind of converge together. So this is a map of the south part of Illinois, and the numbered areas are the different divisions. And I'm going to talk about those today and show some hopefully pretty pictures that everybody will enjoy, and then talk about some of the work that we're doing in these different divisions. So first of all, let's see if my cursor will show up here. I wanted to draw people's attention to this line right here. You can see my cursor. And that kind of marks the southernmost advance of the largest glaciers that we've had. So it's kind of special because this southern part of Illinois has been pretty much unglaciated. So a lot of our geological features are still present, and they haven't been pulverized and ground down like a lot of the rest of the state and flattened. So the Illinois Ozark divisions on the west side, kind of down in here, and it's characterized by a lot of limestone and dominated by oak hickory woodlands. It's a very steep and rugged territory. Number 12 is the the floodplain of the Mississippi and Big Muddy rivers, and it's flat and swampy, and unfortunately a lot of it has been converted to agriculture. There's still some forest present though. The Shawnee Hills Division is the most dominant in Southern Illinois, and it's made up of the Greater Shawnee Hills and the Lesser Shawnee Hills section, kind of again dominated by oak hickory woodlands. And then sometimes it's surprising to folks, but we do have coastal plain division down where the Cache River is. It's very similar habitat to some of the other Gulf states like Mississippi, Louisiana. It's low and flat and tends to be swampy. So it's just a visualization of some of the different divisions. You see the large forest expanses in the Ozark division and the rolling rugged contours. And then the Shawnee Hills division, more on the eastern side of the state, is dominated more by limestone and thin soil layers. So it supports several different rare habitats like glades and barrens. This is a picture of a glade here in the right-hand corner. The lower Mississippi River Bottomlands Division, former floodplain of the Mississippi River, flat and somewhat swampy with interspersed wetlands and some forest. And then the Coastal Plains Division with the cypress tupelo swamps, some of the furthest north occurring cypress tupelo swamps in the country. This is a visualization of the boundaries of the Shawnee National Forest. And I always thought it's kind of fitting that the boundary sort of looks like a saluki with the head up there. So the blue outline is the outline of the Shawnee National Forest at about 290,000 acres. Sounds like it's a big forest, but actually it's the second smallest national forest in the country, just behind the Hoosier National Forest in Indiana. So even though, you know, this boundary looks really large and it occurs from the Ohio River to the Mississippi River, one thing to note is that the Shawnee National Forest is a very highly fragmented forest. So within this blue outline, there's a lot of private lands interspersed. So it's very fragmented forest. So that provides some challenges for management. So the yellow areas denote natural areas. So there are 80 designated natural areas within the Shawnee National Forest. And I'll talk about those a little bit coming up. And then within the larger boundary, there's, you see the blue outlines. These are 7 of our designated wilderness areas. And a lot of times if you talk to people that don't know a lot about the Shawnee National Forest and you tell them that there are seven wilderness areas in Illinois, they're, kind of surprised sometimes. Those were designated in the 90s by Congress. So talking about some of the places that we work, we try to focus a lot on the natural areas. There are a few different types of natural areas designated within the Shawnee National Forest. We have ecological areas, which are meant to protect rare plant and animal communities. And then we have zoological areas that are meant to protect threatened and endangered animal species. And then we also have research natural areas where the folks with the Shawnee National Forest and other researchers have been doing research on these systems for years. So a lot of times we're out doing work and assessments, we encounter a lot of really neat plant species. And these are pictures that were taken one day when we were doing a non-native invasive species assessment at one of the designated natural areas. My favorite was the yellow lady slipper orchid that we found. Very pretty, rare plant. And then other plants that are maybe a little less rare, but the climbing milkweed is a pretty rare species that we found. So talking about some of the different areas as well as where we work. This site is a double branch whole ecological area. It's in the Greater Shawnee Hills Division, kind of towards the east side of the forest. Again, an area dominated by sandstone and a lot of times carved by water and wind erosion. And we find different rare plant communities here as well. Thin soil over top, a lot of times exposed limestone. And I was going to talk a little bit later about what we do when we work at some of these sites. And one of our biggest tools is prescribed fire. And this is a picture of an assessment we did after a spring prescribed fire at the Simpson Barrens ecological area in the Lesser Shawnee Hills Division. This is kind of like an open barrens, and it supports some pretty rare plant communities. And the goal of this prescribed fire was trying to reduce some of the woody encroachment. So you can see some of the burned out small brush and saplings. And then how these sites respond after a prescribed fire. It's usually pretty remarkable. These systems are all fire adapted, and a lot of the plants are adapted and actually favor fire and do very well after prescribed fire. These sites have been burning mostly for thousands of years. A lot of fire introduced by natural occurrences like lightning, but then a lot of fire put on the ground by people, specifically to manage these areas, like Native Americans used fire as a tool. During that assessment, these are some of the plants that we saw responding to the fire. Some rare plants, are more rare, like the horrid cocoon and the pussy toes and alum root. And then we're going to go down to the Coastal Plain Division. This site is Heron Pond Nature Preserve. And if you haven't been there, it's really unique. It's a cypress tupelo swamp, and it's really different from season to season. It's very beautiful. This picture looks like it was probably taken in late fall or winter. Cypress are a deciduous coniferous tree, which means that it drops its needles every winter. So you can kind of see some of the brown needles hanging onto the trees. But if you go here in the summer, it's probably the greenest of green places you'll ever see. The water's green, the tree canopy's green, all the green plants. It's a beautiful sight. And it's a moderately short hike down into here. And you can kind of see on the right-hand side, there's a floating walkway where you can actually get right out and in amongst the cypress trees and see wildlife and whatnot. This is a shot showing two of the different divisions. So the picture is taken from on top of LaRue Pine Hills, the research natural area, and it overlooks the Mississippi River Bottomlands Division. So a shot taken from the Ozark Division looking out over the Mississippi River Bottomlands Division. So way off in the distance would be the Mississippi River on the other side of this feature, which is called Devil's Backbone. So you can't even see the Mississippi, but it's beyond Devil's Backbone here. And you've got a lot of swamps, and it's a very unique habitat for a lot of amphibians and reptiles. They would spend their spring and summer in the the swamps and then migrate up into the Ozark division and LaRue Pine Hills into the cracks and crevices in the limestone and overwinter or hibernate. So just below here is the, can't see it, but it's Snake Road, where a lot of folks, well, the Forest Service closes the road and a lot of folks are able to hike it and see a lot of different reptiles and amphibians during their migration in the spring and fall. We have some very unique, for the state of Illinois, waterways in the Shawnee National Forest. So this is Lusk Creek, and it's in the Lusk Creek Wilderness, and it's spring-fed, very clear water, rocky, supports a lot of different aquatic organisms, and even some rare fish species, some of the darters. And the inset down in the right is shows the boundary of Lusk Creek Wilderness, and then the colored lines are where we've done work, where we've dropped lines with our handheld computers, and it kind of shows how we get around in some of the areas and do our work. So the little purple dots would designate, I believe, what would be probably garlic mustard work. So probably pulling garlic mustard at some point in the year, our crew. So this is a shot of Panther Creek Wilderness Area. It's our smallest wilderness area, but again, very unique geological features. I always wonder what and when this giant slab of stone sheared off of the side and fell flat on the ground. And even though we focus a lot on the plants, those plant and communities support a lot of unique creatures. So these are just some pictures of some of the things we've encountered as we're doing our work. We do have 3 venomous snakes here in Southern Illinois, and oftentimes we'll encounter them when we're out in the forest doing our work. Timber rattlesnake, it's a threatened species in Illinois, and they're very beautiful, very docile animals. They really don't want to be bothered, and we don't bother them. I always thought that the hickory horn devil caterpillar that we found working one day is probably one of the strangest things I've ever seen. It's got adaptations that probably make it look not very palatable. So it's got what looks like our spines on it, which would probably deter any predator from wanting to eat it. So we also, along with doing work on federal lands and private lands, we also work on state lands as well. Like this is a shot of Borks Falls at Thorncliffe State Park. We have a lot of very beautiful and unique waterfalls in Southern Illinois due to the unique geology of our area. This is another cascade. It's a Ghost Dance Canyon at Dixon Springs State Park, and this area can be accessed by a short trail, so it's fairly easy to get to see these cascades. And at times of the year when we get a lot of precipitation, it's a really cool area to visit. You can park pretty close to where this formation is. I always like this picture too. It's at Stone Bluff or Stone Fort Bluff, looking out over the forest. And what I really like about this, it just shows the vastness of the forest here in the Burton Falls Wilderness area. And then, more unique geological features. Pomona Natural Bridge, which is just down the road from where I live. Places that we'd like to go hiking. This is a natural bridge that's about 90 feet long, and it was probably carved out by eons of fluvial action with the small creek flowing through here. So what we do and how we do our work. We have what we call the Interagency Habitat and Fuels Crew, and we work with several different partners doing stewardship work in and around the Shawnee and even on private lands. So we help out the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the U.S. Forest Service. We're mostly funded through the U.S. Forest Service. And then we also, work with private funds as well through our generous donors. So we do invasive species treatment, fire, timber stand improvement, things like that, year round. So I mentioned earlier that we collect a lot of data on our handheld computers as we're working, and this just kind of shows a snapshot of 1 year, and the different colors are different treatments. So we get around quite a bit from the east side of the forest to the west. The different colors indicate different treatments, whether it be prescribed fire, spot spraying chemical for invasive species, hand pulling, timber stand improvement, things like that. Yeah, and our invasive species work, this is one of the least fun things that we do. We've got kudzu in certain areas of the forest, and we're trying to control it with the Forest Service. And they don't call it the vine that ate the South for nothing. It's usually not fun work. It covers everything. And a lot of times you have to do a combination of cutting the vines and treating the cut vines, and then also spraying. So it usually ends up being a lot of stumbling around, tripping and falling, because that stuff is everywhere, all over the ground, and it's thick. We're trying to keep that at bay. I believe this site right here was about a 30-acre site that we were working on, and it takes many years of follow-up treatments to try to eliminate it. If it's let go, then it'll really take off and do a lot of harm to our oak hickory ecosystem. So we do what we call forest stand improvement. So one of the concerns in our oak hickory systems is that they're slowly kind of changing. Some of the more shade tolerant trees like beech and maple are starting to take hold more and more, and that's due to lack of disturbance like prescribed fire. So what happens is the forest over time becomes darker and wetter, and it favors these shade tolerant trees. So what the fear is that we're losing reproduction of our oaks and our hickories, because the young oak seedlings kind of prefer a more open, sunny area to thrive. So this is an area at Trail of Tears State Park where we did some thinning of beech and maple and kind of open up the canopy, which allows that understory, with the native plants and to do much better. So you end up having more forbs and grasses that come back, and that's good for a whole host of different organisms, and even bats, that they prefer a more open forest. Yeah, here's a little explanation. I kind of covered some of this already. This is a picture taken at Barker Bluff, Illinois Department of Natural Resources site. So yeah, one of the things that forest stand improvement, less is more. So when we go in and do this, it kind of reduces competition for those young oak seedlings, and it frees resources up. It increases abundance and diversity of understory plants, and it improves wildlife habitat, and also it just looks nicer. This is the representation. On the right-hand side is where the timber stand improvement was done. On the left-hand side, There's been no timber stand improvement done. So you can see right here is maple, and that's mostly what dominates the understory. So there would be little to no oak regeneration over on this side. Over on this side, you can see, the understory just looks healthier. We do a lot of prescribed fire. This is a picture taken at atop Pine Hills, and this is the kind of the entrance to Snake Road coming off of Route 3. This is a fire we did a couple years ago with the Forest Service. Why do we do fire? These systems are all fire adapted systems, so they require fire to maintain a healthy state. It reduces fuel loading, and fuel loading is a real thing. People might not think that we would ever see large catastrophic wildfires in our part of the world, but I always like to point to what happened, the catastrophe that happened in around Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and Pigeon Forge a few years ago. Very similar habitat types to what we have here, and they experienced extreme fuel loading from lack of fire, and then all it took was a couple of years of drought-like conditions to create a real problem, and we don't want to have that happen here. So what do we have to do? It takes a long time to prepare for a prescribed fire. There's many times there's years of planning and writing burn prescriptions and getting all the required approvals. And in the meantime, they have to be prepared. So this kind of shows our fire break right here in the middle. So we would come in ahead of time before we do a fire and blow the leaves off this fire break, or do some cutting of hazardous trees along the fire line to reduce, the hazard of those trees and they're maybe catching on fire and letting the fire escape across the line and even falling. This is a shot of preparing a fire line for a burn, and reduce and getting rid of a snag that had fallen across the fire line. So just over this last year, our crew prepped about 14,000 acres of prescribed fire units here around the forest. And then we also join the Interagency Crews when we perform these. So we have a lot of highly trained staff with a lot of experience with prescribed fire. And a lot of times we occupy pretty important roles during a prescribed fire. I think this shows one of our crew members doing a firing operation. This is a picture at one of the open land tracks in the forest. We did this fire to help maintain the open character of this area for grassland nesting birds. And a lot of these fires are going on, before the nesting season, and it's happening right now. This whole week is one of our biggest burn windows of the year. So we've got crews that are scattered out right now all across the forest, helping multiple partners pull off these burns. What are our priorities? Well, we try to prioritize around the natural areas to protect them and help them flourish. This is a shot that we took during an assessment after a fire. We'll a lot of times come back into these areas and assess the efficacy of the prescribed fire. This is at Cave Hill, and it shows that lush understory that was responding positively to prescribed fire. Again, an open lands burn. kind of see some of the woody encroachment that's occurring in here. We do these burns to try to reduce that woody component. And then when we're not doing prescribed fire or treatments within the Shawnee National Forest, a lot of times our crew will join interagency crews that are dispatched out of Illinois to assist on Western wildfires. This was from a couple years ago, a fire that our crew was on in Utah. So they get to use their skills and to help people in other states, and it also gets them a lot of really good experience, and it's kind of a crew bonding experience as well. This is one of the big fires in Colorado, the Pine Gulch fire. It was hundreds of thousands of acres, and you can see along with our vehicle here, we've got Illinois Department of Natural Resources vehicles too. Sometimes on these fires, a lot of times they're so dangerous, all you can do is kind of watch them and wait for the opportunity to try to control them. We also do work in the Cache River wetlands. We've been a member of the Cache River Joint Venture Partnership for decades, and we've been working in and around the cache to try to preserve and protect it. We've purchased hundreds of acres for other agencies. So sometimes we'll come in and if there's a protection opportunity, we will buy the property and then maybe hold on to it for a few years and then roll it out to the appropriate other agency. So one of the most important things we've done here in the last few years is to help with water management. So installing a couple water structures that help managers better manage these cypress tupelo swamps. There's been success stories too over time. This is a picture of a small fish that was thought to be extirpated from the Cache River wetlands back in the 80s. They hadn't found any since like 1980. And 2 years ago, some ichthyologists that were working for the Department of Natural Resources doing an assessment of the fish communities in the cache found the tail-light shiner again. So it's not gone from Illinois after all. And then other large projects, we're assisting the Natural Resource Conservation Service with in the Mississippi River floodplains. This is an area that was levied off from the Mississippi River several years ago, and the levee failed a few years ago. So what the Mississippi was trying to do was cut across this this peninsula, which is about 15,000 acres, and it would cut short the navigation channel for the Mississippi River if it's allowed to continue to do that. So we worked with the NRCS to bring in altogether about $25 million for voluntary easements for some of these farmers and ag producers. They suffered great crop losses, and their fields a lot of times were transformed into big sand dunes. So they're right now signing up farmers to for these easements, which are similar to CRP. They're wetland reserve easements and emergency floodplain easements. So we were able to match with about $600,000 that the Nature Conservancy was able to raise to bring this almost $25 million into that area to help the landowners, and the area will be restored mostly with tree plantings. So with that, I'll end and we'll take any questions. They can be served up in a chat, I believe.
We have a couple of questions that have shown up. Linda Dutcher was asking, are the changes in tree species the result of a natural succession or some other cause?
Well, lack of fire and other disturbances in the forest it's kind of changing the dynamics of our oak hickory woodlands, and it's happening not only here but all across the eastern United States. It's a process called mesification, where with lack of fire and other management, that it's kind of turning over into a more dark and wet forest, and it favors the shade tolerant trees like beech and maple. And oaks are so important for so many different species. There's about 40 times the species of caterpillars that utilize oak trees over, say, a maple or a beech. And then, not to mention the mass production with the acorns and hickory nuts that are used by several different species of wildlife, deer and squirrels and whatnot, turkeys.
And if I can follow up on that, did you see the essay Sam Stearns had in the Southern Illinoisan a week or two ago, where he was criticizing allowing timbering on the Forest Service and criticizing programs like the Let the Sunshine In program, kind of challenging the idea that there should be management for oak and hickory, and that it was okay to, he was challenging the idea that it was okay to timber beech and maple. Did you see that editorial or have any response to it?
I didn't see that. No. I have seen a lot of research that's been done on oak hickory systems, and the potential for them to change, and in fact they are changing, and due to lack of management. The Shawnee National Forest does not do very much in the way of harvesting timber. They're doing a little bit more, but over the years there hasn't been a whole lot done. The National Forest System was adopted to help provide timber for the country. That was one of the goals of the national forests, with the idea that timber was getting scarce and we needed to manage our national holdings, because people aren't going to soon quit using wood products. And timber is a renewable resource. Once our oaks get a certain age, they start to blink out, and they're not useful for anything after that.
Another question we had, this was from Teresa Stanhouse. Do you know a good resource for learning about how the geographic regions were formed? John Schwegman's book comes to mind.
Yeah. There's a pretty good book that I read. It's been out for a while, but it's called Geology Underfoot in Illinois, and it talks about the different geographical regions and how they were formed. I don't know if I have that readily available. I think it might be at my office.
Okay, that's one suggestion. That sounds good.
Yeah.
And there's a request from Michael Ruland that you would comment on the remaining CCC pine stands, that they're getting pretty old.
Yeah, so that's been the focus for harvest for the Forest Service, because those pine plantations were planted back when the forest was established to help reduce the erosion that was occurring with some of the farm fields that were in kind of questionable areas. And so pine growing very fast, it was one of the tree species they utilized to try to control that erosion. So now the thought is that, the pine is not, that particular pine that was planted is not native to Illinois. And they're trying to go in and harvest some of that older pine plantations and try to convert it to back to oak hickory.
Dorsey Prosser's asking, how much of a problem are invasives at Heron Pond?
They're not terrible. We've gone in and done a lot of invasives work there. You still got, like stilt grass. Can't think of any aquatics that are too highly invasive, but a lot of times if you have a trail system, it kind of invites invasive species because people bring in the seeds on their shoes and things like that. And a lot of times we'll find that invasive species starting to take hold along trails. So that's a lot of times where we focus our work on.
Linda Dutcher also asked, how does the Nature Conservancy decide when to intervene in what may be natural processes? For example, rivers are constantly changing course, especially during floods with accompanying changes to floodplains.
Yeah, the Dogtooth Bend area, the Mississippi River was trying to cut off, and the Corps of Engineers was highly concerned about losing their navigation channel. So they were worried about it. It's kind of more of a people project there. The folks were harmed financially and losing their way of life, and we tried to come up with solutions that could help them and also improve habitat. There's potential to plant millions of trees in that area, and it's something that we would want to see. So it's a kind of a way to help out people with also helping out the environment. If we didn't have navigation to worry about, you could kind of let Mississippi go where it wanted to go, but unfortunately, it's very valuable for navigation.
Gail was asking, do you have a standing list of possible projects to prioritize for future work? And also, has the area seen significant changes over the last 5 years, possibly attributable to climate warming?
That's a good question. We annually have a work planning meeting where we get together with partners and we talk about needs in different parts of the forest, and we get suggestions on areas to work from, say, the Forest Service or DNR, and we prioritize those sites, usually prioritizing the highest quality sites and the ones where you can actually make a difference in treating invasive species, keeping things out of the natural areas that are fairly pristine. Stilt grass is a big problem all over the forest. And then, kudzu control is a big priority.
I may have missed some questions in the chat. If I missed your question, maybe, here's one from Jennifer. What can residents do to help with conservation efforts?
There's a lot of really good groups down here. I guess, supporting the not-for-profits by becoming a member and, possibly even donating. There's a lot of different groups that have formed through all these partnerships. Some that come to mind are the River to River Cooperative Weed Management Area. They work with private landowners to help them control invasive species on their property. They provide resources and, in many cases, grant out funds to help landowners with work on their forest. Because like I'd said earlier, the Shawnee National Forest is highly fragmented, and there's a lot of, the majority of the land in Southern Illinois is privately owned. There's another group that's called the FRST, the Forest Resource Support Team. And it's a group of volunteers that they have a coordinator, and they bring in grant funds to help private landowners with work. Some work here recently that comes to mind is around the Union Hills subdivision. The FRST is helping them out a lot right now, doing invasive species work. They just had a work day, I think maybe last Sunday, where some of our staff went and helped. They worked around Cedar Lake and treating autumn olive and bush honeysuckle. And, there's a lot of that going on. I know you mentioned Let the Sunshine In earlier. They're working with private landowners on work on their land as well.
And then another question was, does the Nature Conservancy get involved with litigation?
Usually not. We're non-confrontational. We will back like some legislation that we feel is important, but we do have some lobbyists, but we don't do a whole lot of that because we're a 501c3, so we're limited in how much of that kind of work we can do. We have government relations folks that work at the state and federal level on legislation, but as far as litigation goes, usually not. There's other groups that are a little bit better at that than we are, and are allowed to do that more, like the Sierra Club and groups like that.
There's another climate change question asking if you would comment on possible impact of climate change on conservation efforts in the Southern Illinois area.
Yeah, there's, climate change is happening, and we're going to see some changes in our forests, and we have to work to try to maintain the integrity of those forests with climate change being another one of the stressors. One of the things that makes Southern Illinois unique too is like we have a lot of intact forest that can help kind of mitigate climate change a little bit. It's also a very important migration corridor. I had looked at some Google Maps, and starting in southern Missouri and into Arkansas, you can pretty much follow that forest band all the way through Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. So it's a very important migration corridor for animals that are maybe during their regular migration, or if they're moving to other areas because of climate change, maybe moving farther north. So our forest is a very important part of that migration corridor.
Do you think the recent rise of armadillos in the area is a climate change?
Well, yeah, for sure. That's a feature. Yep.
And if I missed the question in the chat, please maybe raise your hand and we can let you ask the question. Been trying to follow the questions. Anything else? Here we have, thank you so much for this workshop, Tharran. So insightful and educational. Thank you for putting this on.
I just wanted to mention that in the questions, there's a lot of appreciation and praise too. If Tharran could see that somehow, I think people have really enjoyed this program.
I'll pull up the chat.
People were very appreciative. We really appreciate your doing this.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's great
was
work.
trying-
It's important work.
I was trying to look for the name of John Schwegman's book, and I didn't find it on my phone real quickly. If somebody knows that, they might put it into the chat.
So somebody had a recommendation for a book, The Nature of Oaks by Douglas Tallamay.
Yes.
Says it's an excellent book on why why oaks are so wonderful and necessary.
Well, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, The Natural History of Illinois by John Schwegman is what Michael Rulin tells us.
Yeah. So
He talks a
coming
lot
up-
about the land divisions. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I should have mentioned that coming up is the 50th anniversary of Heron Pond as a dedicated nature preserve. They're having some events surrounding that at the Barkhausen Wetlands Center and also on the site at Heron Pond.
And we're reminded that tomorrow is World Wildlife Day. Well, thank you very much. This has been very enjoyable.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming, and I invite you all to participate in our next program, which will be the first Wednesday of April, April 6th, I believe. Yeah, April 6th at 12 o'clock. Thank you again for coming.